Hey there, Eric Chessen, founder of Autism Fitness, leading the movement for movement and leading this edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training. And in this edition, I'm going to be bringing up to me anyway, big question of, is there such a thing as a bad exercise? Now, we can talk about this in general terms and then apply it to the autism and neurodivergent population. So in general, what do we mean by bad? We want to operationally define that first. A bad exercise is, and I'm going to go out there and say, not necessarily bad, but misapplied and has less than a basic benefit for somebody. And we can fine tune the definition from there. But as a general statement, I would say yes, there are bad exercises or bad choices of exercises, and then we'll discuss that within the realm of autism and neurodivergent populations, right? So what do we mean by a bad exercise? I'm going to operationally define this. I would say that a bad exercise is one that is not going to increase a skill that is needed. It's not going to be a fundamental skill, and it's not going to enhance an ability or a strength or a motor pattern that is needed. And it's also not going to follow our basic hierarchy of needs. I'll get into that in a second. Second, it might be something that's too advanced for a population. That's really important when we talk about the autism population specifically. And of course, that also goes to other neurodivergent populations as well. So what makes a bad exercise? Well, first we want to look at that exercise hierarchy. When we are programming for the autism and neurodivergent population, the baseline skill that we want to enhance is strength, period. Now, we're not talking about maximal strength, so sometimes it is misunderstood or misrepresented. We're not talking about how much weight can you lift or how much weight can you squat or how much can you overhead press. We're not talking about that at all. We're not talking about numbers in the close to maximum range 99.999% of the time. Rather, we're talking about strength with respect to the development of lean muscle mass, and that is going to generalize to activities of daily living. So our foundational exercises that we talk about in autism fitness programming are squatting, are pushing, our pulling, our carrying. These are all skills that we know are going to generalize to activities of daily living. Now, the question comes up sometimes from parents or professionals, insert this individual's name here. They're already really strong, so we want to focus on cardio or we want to focus on flexibility, which is well-intentioned but misguided. You might have an individual who is able to exert a lot of force, especially when they are motivated, both for beneficial and what we might say not so beneficial situations where it might be maladaptive or the individual might be engaging in some type of dysregulated behavior. But that's also a demonstration of very specific strength. Just because an individual can push through a door doesn't necessarily mean that they have good squatting mechanics. Now, what does one thing have to do with the other? Exactly my point. One doesn't have anything to do with the other. So we have to localize our definition of strength to each of those particular movements. And it's also a safety issue as well. Over time, what do we know as individuals age is that we're going to see muscular and bone degeneration as well. Having someone who is strong in all of those different ranges of motion, in all those different movement patterns, in all those different movement patterns and all those different ranges of motion is going to make for a safer and better moving individual. So we want to keep that in mind. So let's bring this back to selection of exercise in terms of a hierarchy. What is most important? Strength is going to be most important. And then the question is, well, how many times are we working out or running our fitness program or our adapted PE program per week? Well, if we say once or twice, which is kind of average, then we want to focus predominantly on those strength-based exercises, which is going to leave less room for other skill development, right? So we're going to say that our foundational exercises, again, back to squatting and pressing and pulling and pushing and carrying, are going to be the priority in our program. So let's bring that back again. What then makes for a bad exercise? A bad exercise in that case is going to be an exercise that is in fundamental contrast with those exercises. I'll give an example. Let's say that we have an athlete who really needs to enhance their squat pattern because they're either flopping down or dropping down to the box or to the bench when we have them squat. Well, if we recognize this as an important movement, and that's what we're doing in Autism Fitness, is creating the fundamentals of fitness needs, then why would we have that athlete, for example, try to jump rope or try to do a bicep curl or have them start rolling around on the floor? These are exercises that, while we say, oh, they're not bad in that the individual is going to get hurt, we'll get to that next, but it's a misuse of our time, a misuse of our coaching, and a misunderstanding of the application of the fundamental principles of strength training and conditioning, which again is the basis of what we're doing here. Now, a bad exercise also with respect to the risk to reward here, and this happens all the time, I see it all the time, I would love to call it out on a more regular basis, is a lot of jumping and a lot of high energy activity, or things that I wouldn't necessarily call it plyometric, but a lot of jumping and high energy expenditure activities. Now, it looks really exciting, it looks really fun, but from a movement standards perspective, if you do not have an underlying strength base, there is really no reason to start developing power-based skills like jumping, because there is not a really good risk to benefit reward. Someone is not going to benefit from adding in jumps in their program, especially if they don't already have the underlying strength to control that hip flexion movement. We want our athletes to develop control through the range of motion before they develop explosivity through that range of motion. So jumping around might look cool, but it's not really serving the athlete much benefit. And if we slow it down in video format and really look at it, most of the time we see significant compensation with that athlete's movement pattern. What does that mean? It means that we see them folding forward. It means that we see internal hip rotation, knee valgus, knees turning in, or they are landing stiff-legged. So when they land, the ankle, the knee, and the hip are all straight, which means that there's a lot of force, but not an appropriate amount of force dispersion, meaning the athlete lands in an athletic position and the brunt of that force is not taken by, again, the ankles and knees and hips. So even though it looks cool and it looks like fitness, it's really not serving the athlete any benefit. So if we look at this again from the perspective of more beneficial versus less beneficial, our compound movements, what we refer to our compound movements, again, I'm going to come back to this: squatting, pushing, pulling, carrying. These are going to have much more benefit in terms of developing generalizable strength than some of our more isolation exercises. You rarely have an actual isolation exercise, but something like a bicep curl, for example, or even like a tricep skull crusher or a tricep push down, something like that, or a calf raise. The question needs to be asked, is this exercise going to create a net benefit that is more important or more productive than, say, our fundamental movement pattern right now? If you have infinite time throughout the week to implement fitness programs, which is typically not the case, even for neurotypical individuals, then you really have to start picking and choosing. And this is what good program design is all about. Now, the cool thing is it doesn't vary all that much from a physiological perspective for the autism neurodivergent population as it does for the neurotypical population. However, it does take a certain level of training and expertise to understand and be able to implement good programming. So yes, there is good programming and there is less than good programming. Number one, from the generalization component, and number two, from the safety component as well. In 20-something years of delivering this, I've seen a lot of programs that, to be very liberal, that certainly lack in understanding the programming basis, and it's more of a let's throw in this and let's throw in that, and using this hula hoop looks like fun, and using this volleyball looks like fun. However, we have to understand programming from the standpoint of what are we trying to accomplish here. And if we can agree that what we're trying to accomplish is developing general strength and quality motor planning that can then be utilized in a vast array of environments and situations, then is hitting around a beach ball conducive to that? No. Is doing really fast bicep curls with virtually no control whatsoever going to do that? No. Is jumping around over a bunch of hurdles or spot markers or left and right and all over the place going to do that? No. And from a physiological or a biomechanical standpoint, meaning what is the movement doing? What is the human being doing when they're doing that movement? Can that be argued? No, that's basic human physiology. We want to develop motor control through the full range of motion in a compound movement, and that's the thing that's going to generalize the most, right? I would love to have that argument, perhaps someday in a great debate. But until that point, until that happens, the question is, what's our hierarchy? And okay, why are we doing this exercise? Why are we doing this jumping movement, or this complex array of moving around and jumping around in all these different ways, instead of this other exercise that I would think is fundamental? Again, squatting, pushing, pulling, carrying, pressing. All right. Then the other part of having a bad exercise versus a good exercise, a bad exercise is going to be any exercise variation that is currently too challenging for the athlete. And we see this a lot in the autism and neurodivergent space. So you can take any of the exercises that I've listed, good and less so, and if it's coached at a level that is far too challenging for the athlete, and we start seeing that mechanical breakdown. So in a squat, we see the knees turning in, we see the upper body folding in the athlete. It is contraindicated for that individual because we're seeing compensatory movement. So if we keep programming it at a level that's too high, or at an expectation that's too high for the athlete, it's not going to benefit them. It's only inviting compensatory movement. They are not going to get better at it simply because we have them do it more. We have to modify the exercise. So a bad exercise can be a good exercise gone wrong, because the coach or the programmer doesn't understand when they need to modify that exercise. So to encapsulate everything that I'm talking about, is there such a thing as a bad exercise for the autism and neurodivergent population? Asterisks there, but I would say yes, it's more of poor choice and misguided implementation more than anything else. But we really need to understand the fundamental aspects of high quality fitness programming, especially. No, your video feed is not caught. It's not on loop. I actually said especially 3 times, now 4, for the autism and neurodivergent population, because we tend to see a lot of strength and motor deficits. If we see those more, our exercise selection and implementation has to be that much more precise for them to be able to get to the point where that athlete has motor control through that exercise. So I hope this has been helpful. For me, this is a big deal because programming needs to be done right, especially for these populations. It's not a question of just these are the exercises that I know, so we're going to implement these. There is a time and a place for some exercises, and for others, not so much. And that's fine. It is a filtration process. We use the exercises that we know are going to have the greatest generalization potential, period. And I'll leave you with this. There is no such thing as an autism-specific exercise. We don't need to invent new exercises for these populations. We need to understand how to apply exercises that we know to have a high degree of benefit for each individual in a way that's conducive to them being able to perform it independently. That's a lot. You can rewind it, listen to it back, because it is important. Anyhow, if you found this helpful, if you have a question about programming, if you have a comment about a good exercise versus a bad exercise, if someone wants to debate me on this, I'd love to do it. Please put it in the comments below. If this has been helpful for you, comments below. If there's a topic that you'd like me to cover in a future edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, put it in the comments below. And if you are ready to become an Autism Fitness Certified Pro, head on over to autismfitness.com. You can do your full day practical either virtually from the comfort of your home or gym or clinic or anywhere else, or you can do it in person, select dates and locations. And that's all I got for you today. I'm Eric Chessen, founder of Autism Fitness, leading the movement for movement. Definitely please subscribe, and share this with someone whom it might benefit. Thank you for watching.